Shalom, my name is Joseph Shulam. I've been teaching 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, and I've arrived to chapter 16 of 2 Samuel, and that's what we're going to study today. But just as a catch-up, as a connection with the previous chapter, Absalom rebelled against his father David, amassed an army with chariots, with horses, with thousands of men, established his kingdom in Hebron, the place that David started his kingship. It was 7 years in kingdom. It was 7 years in Hebron before he had Joab and his men conquer Jerusalem, and then he moved to Jerusalem. Now Absalom was exiled for 4 years after he murdered his brother Amnon up in the Golan Heights in the land of Gshur, where his mother was from, and he stayed there with his grandfather. And then he came back when David missed him so much, loved him so much. He was the heir to the throne after Amnon died, that he asked him to come back. He came back and lived in his house in Jerusalem and tried to get the favor of the people, to become popular with the people of Jerusalem, and then finally asked permission from David to move to Hebron. And there he actually set himself as a judge, almost as a king, became very popular because he did favors for the people that came to him for judgment. And finally, he's threatening David, and I think David's life as well. So David and his men and his entourage leave Jerusalem in shame. Some of David's top advisors joined with Absalom, and the head one of them is Ahithophel the Gilonite. And David takes a very interesting, smart, strategic move. He sends Ahimaaz and Jonathan and Eviatar, the priests, and Sadok, back with the Ark of the Covenant, which they took with them when they were fleeing away from Jerusalem, and said, no, go back to Jerusalem. And he sets a spy network to spy after what Absalom is planning on doing and what he's doing. And it's actually a network. If you read chapter 15, the last parts of chapter 15, you will see it's a spy network. And he runs down through the Kidron Valley, through the Judean desert, down to the Jordan River. And that spy network that is headed by the priests and by Hushai, the Heir, the David's friend, and they return to Jerusalem with the ark, and they swear allegiance to Absalom as king, and they are David's inside people in the circles of Absalom in Jerusalem, and they're there to observe and check what Absalom is doing, what he's planning, and whether he's going to go out on a full-fledged war against his father David, who's fleeing from him in a shameful way. And so David, we are now arrived in chapter 16 of 2 Samuel, verse 1. I'll switch to the English for a minute so that I could read it in English for you. Chapter 16, when David was a little past the top of the mountain, there was Siva, the servant of Mephiboshes. Now in the English translations, following the Greek, Mephibosheth is a nickname, not a good name. Boshet means shame, and also a female body part, and his name was Mephibosheth, named after Baal by his father, obviously, by Saul's family. And in our text, in the Hebrew text, is Mephiboshes, which is a bad nickname. So the chapter 16 starts with David going over the Mount of Olives into the desert, and when he gets to the top, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, Saul's son, meets him with a couple of saddled donkeys, 200 loaves of bread, 100 clusters of raisin, 100 summer fruit, which means dried figs, and skin of wine. And the king, King David, verse 2 says to Ziba, "What do you mean to do with these?" Ziba says, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and the summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine for those who are faint in the wilderness to drink." Now, that's an interesting move. Mephibosheth is the last heir to the family of King Saul. Everybody died except this crippled son of King Saul that received, by the way, the protectorate of King David as the last heir of King Saul. Now, this last heir of King Saul, that no doubt knows what happened, knows about King Saul's hate for David, knows about King Saul's search for David over 20 years to kill him throughout the desert of Judea and En-Gedi, and then the Adullam area in the low hill country between the Negev and Gaza. But here, this same Mephibosheth sends David vehicles, 2 donkeys, saddled donkeys, and food. In other words, Mephibosheth returns to David good for what he considered evil that was done to his grandfather and to his family of King Saul. And David asked Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, what is all this that you're bringing? He said, "It's for food. The donkeys are for the king's household to ride, and the bread is and the summer fruit is for the young men to eat, and the wine for those who are faint in the wilderness to drink." David responds to him and says, "And where is your master's son?" Ziba said to the king, "Indeed, he is staying in Jerusalem, for he said, 'Today the house of Israel will restore the kingdom to my father to me.'" Now, this family of King Saul thinks that if he goes now to Jerusalem, where Absalom is taken from David, then the kingdom of King Saul will be restored. He doesn't know Absalom so well, and I guess there was no newspapers or television to tell him what Absalom was doing. But he has hopes. He has high hopes. Yeah. And he says, "I'll go. I'm going to Jerusalem. I'm in Jerusalem with the hope that the kingdom of my father will be restored to me. So the king said to Siva, here, all that belongs to Mephibosheth is yours. David, I guess, gives the servant all the property of Mephibosheth that belonged to King Saul earlier. And Ziba said, I humbly bow before you, that I may find favor in your sight, my lord, O king. And now the King David came to Bahurim. There was a man from the family of the house of Saul. In other words, we saw Ziba, the servant of the son of Saul, the crippled son of Saul. We saw the son of Saul going to Jerusalem to try to manage to get back at least some of the property and the kingdom of his grandfather Saul. Oh no, of his father Saul. And Ziba brings this food and moves his allegiance to King David and to King David's camp. And he says, go now back to serve your master. Ziba says, no, I'm going to stay with you. I'm going to serve you. You are my Lord and you are my king. Verse 5, when King David came to Bahurim, there was a man from the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gerah. Coming from there, he came out cursing continuously as he came. And he threw stones at David and all the servants of King David, and all the people and all the mighty men were on his right hand and on his left. In other words, Shimei, the son of Gerah, was out there in the desert of Judea, throwing rocks from on top of the hills on the people of David that were walking in the valleys with their entourage and with their donkeys. And he's cursing the king. And David's mighty men were there. They could have caught him. Also, verse 7, Shimei said thus, when he cursed, come out, you bloodthirsty men, you rogue. The Lord has brought upon you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned, and the Lord has delivered the kingdom into the hands of Absalom, your son. So now you are caught in your own evil, because you are a bloodthirsty man. So this Shimei ben Gerah is still holding the position that whatever David did to take the kingdom from King Saul was evil, was rebellious, was against God's will. We know that it wasn't against God's will. It was God's will. God, through Samuel, took the kingdom away from King Saul, not David. King Saul tore a piece of Samuel's coat, of Samuel's garment. And Samuel in chapter 15 says, you have now torn the kingdom from, God has torn the kingdom from your hands, and he's going to give it to somebody else. Of course, King David, or Absalom, and the biblical narrative already knew that, because King David was anointed by Samuel much earlier than this event. So this Shimei ben Gerah is cursing and throwing stones at the king and accusing him horrible accusations. So Abishai, the son of Tzeruiah, Joab's younger brother, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Please let me go over and take off his head. And of course, Abishai ben Tzeruiah was a hero, was a general. We could have easily taken this dead dog's head, as he calls him. But the king said, what have I to do with you, sons of Tzeruiah? So let him curse, because the Lord has said to him, curse David, who then shall say, why have you done so? No, who then shall say, why have you done so? David thinks and believes that it is God who sent this ex-servant of King Saul, son of Gerah, Shimei, the son of Gerah, to curse David, to embarrass David, to demean David, to make David feel bad. And David believes that God sent Shimei ben Gerah to do this cursing and to throw rocks at him. Therefore he tells his general, Abishai, no, leave him alone. Leave him alone. And David gives the rationale behind this. David said to Abishai and to all the servants, see how my son, who came from my own body, seeks my life? How much more now may this Benjaminite, tribe of Saul was Benjamin, let him alone, let him curse, for so the Lord has ordered him. It may be that the Lord will look at my affliction, and that the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing this day. Here is a major biblical principle that appears here and ignored by so many Bible scholars, pastors, and Christians. David said, this bad thing that is happening to me, that this man now, Shimei ben Gerah, is cursing me, throwing rocks at me, humbling me, turning against me, persecuting me, whatever word you want to do. He says, let him do it. Maybe the Lord sent him to do exactly this. Leave him alone. Because I think the Lord ordered him to do this. Why? So that the Lord may see my affliction and see how I react to this persecution. And then the Lord, if I react right and accept the persecution, the Lord will repay me with good for this man's cursing on this very day. That's verse 12 of chapter 16. In other words, sometimes what we think is terrible affliction, persecution, pain, suffering, is a test to see how I will accept that persecution. How will I judge myself in front of the reality of my life and my doing and the horrible reality that I'm in now? How will I, relate to these problems? And he says, maybe, God willing, the Lord will repay me good for this persecution that I received this day. It's an interesting concept. Of course, the ministry of Yeshua is based on this concept. Yeshua is willing to go to the cross with the faith that a blessing will come from that suffering on the cross, not only for the world, not only for his disciples, but for him, for Yeshua himself. That concept is here in this chapter 16 of 2 Samuel with King David, who is one of the main forefathers of the Messiah. Yeshua is son of David, son of Abraham. And he catches that principle that we don't catch. We don't catch. I'm not going to talk about the years and years of persecution that Marcia and I and our children and my mother and the small congregation we had in Jerusalem went through terrible persecution. When I say terrible, you can't believe how terrible it was. In fact, there was a couple of times bombs exploded. Fire bombs were thrown into our living room. Physical beatings on me and other brothers. But one incident I have to tell you. I went to visit one of our very, very dear brothers, Orthodox Jew, who lived in Mount Zion, right above one of the ultra-Orthodox rabbinical school, yeshivas. And I had 3 of my disciples who were soldiers at that time with me that wanted to visit with Joseph Wachter, a character that's many books have to be written about him. I haven't written his story yet, but so the 3 disciples, one was named Moshe, the other one was Arya, and the third one was Menachem. And they were studying with Joseph, and I went down to say hi to the yeshiva, which I studied there for 4 years, and I knew the rabbis, I knew everybody. I was dressed in a nice suit, Orthodox style, not on purpose, but I just came from other meetings, and went down by myself. 2 of the rabbinical students, American guys, attacked me, beat me up pretty badly, tore my suit, tore my face, broke a rib, pretty bad. So I returned to Joseph's place in Mount Zion. I was all dirty, bleeding, torn. My disciple asked, "Who did that to you?" I said, 2 of the yeshiva students. They didn't ask me. They were in the army at that time. They took their weapons. They ran down. And before I could make it to the yeshiva, they were inside the yeshiva with their guns, holding all those American students captive in there at gunpoint. And Menachem was a big guy, was holding one of the guys that beat me up by the throat against the wall, and the guy's legs were in the air. They weren't touching the ground. He lifted him up, boom, against the wall. And he was ready to just give him a big punch right in the face. The other 2 were there guarding, and I came in just as he lifted his hand to give him the punch. I said, "Menachem, put him down." But he said, "Why? Isn't it the guy who beat you up?" Said, "He is. Put him down. I forgive him in the name of Yeshua." In the middle of the Orthodox yeshiva, the rabbi came. I knew the rabbi sent them. They didn't do it on their own, the rabbi. But he acted like he was against it, like it was the wrong thing to do, that they did. And the rabbi was from Boston originally, and his family was from Boston. Anyway, Menachem put the guy down, and I said to him in front of everybody, "I forgive you guys that beat me up in the name of Yeshua." You know what that did? It made a lifetime friendship with some of these yeshiva students, and with the rabbi's son, who's now, the old rabbi died, and now the rabbi's son is the head of the yeshiva. And it tied the bond that I forgave them publicly in the name of Yeshua inside the yeshiva. So David is using this concept that if something wrong happened to you, it's a test to see how you're going to react. And we have that in the Sermon on the Mountain. Turn the other cheek, which Yeshua takes from the book of Lamentations, chapter 3. And there we have the explanation why turn the other cheek. It's not because you're a coward. It's because you're strong. Stronger than the guy who hit you in your character. And your faith is stronger than the guy who hit you. Because you know God. That's what David is doing. The Lord will repay me with good for this cursing that has happened to me on this day. As David and his men went along the road, Shimei, the same Shimei, went along the hillside opposite him and cursed him as he went. He didn't stop cursing. He continued. And he continued throwing stone and kicking dust. Now the king and all the people who were with him became weary. So they refreshed themselves there. There's water in that valley that they were going down. There is 2 springs. I baptized over 100 people in the top spring of that valley. Springs that have been flowing for thousands of years. Natural springs of water. Coming out of the inside the earth. In the desert land and greening the valley. Same valley that St. John Monastery is down the road toward Jericho. So the king, after this, Shimei ben Gera didn't stop cursing, didn't stop throwing stones, didn't stop kicking dust. The king got tired, and they stopped there to refresh themselves. Meanwhile, Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, came to Jerusalem, and Achitophel was with him. And so it was when Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came to is one of the people that David sent back to Jerusalem. Hushai the Archite came to Absalom, that Hushai said to Absalom, "Long live the king, long live the king." And then he takes the side of Absalom, takes the allegiance of Absalom. He is inside Absalom's trust and court, but he is one of David's men. And Hushai said to Absalom, "No, by whom the Lord and his people and all the men of Israel choose, his I will be, and with him I will remain." He pledges a kind of allegiance to Absalom. He says, whoever is chosen by the people to be the king, my faithfulness, my allegiance will be as if it's a democracy. It's almost democratic move that Hushai the Archite is. I will go with the majority of the people. Hallelujah. Democracy in Jerusalem. And around the year 1000, around the middle of the year 1000 BC, Absalom knows Hushai from David's friends and David's court. He knows how valuable he was to David, but he doesn't trust Hushai immediately. And he goes to David's top advisor that changed sides, to Achitophel the Gilonite, and says, "Give me advice. What should I do with this Hushai the Archite?" And Achitophel said to Absalom, "Go into your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house, and all Israel will hear that you are abhorred by your father. Then the hands of all who are with you will be strong." And they will pitch it, and so they pitched a tent for Absalom on top of the house, on the roof of the royal house. And Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all of Israel. In other words, he had sex with the 10 concubines, that kind of orgy that his father left there to take care of the house. That was Achitophel's advice. Now the advice of Achitophel, which he gave in those days, was as if one had inquired at the oracle of God. In other words, as if one had inquired. Achitophel was saying, this is God's advice. It's God's will. So all the advice of Ahithophel, both with David and with Absalom, Ahithophel pretended to be a prophet and to speak in the name of God. We've got a dime a dozen of those around the evangelical world today. That's the end of chapter 16, but I'm going to go a little more to tie up the story into chapter 17, verse 1 and on. Moreover, Ahithophel said to Absalom, now let me choose 12,000 men, and I will raise and pursue David tonight. I will come upon him while he is weary and weak, and make him afraid, and all the people who are with him will flee, and I will strike only the king. I'm not going to strike the people that joined with David, but I will kill the king. Kill the king, the people will either flee or join you. Then I will bring back all the people to you. And all return except the men whom you seek. All the people will be at peace. And the saying pleased Absalom and all the elders of Israel. There's a good plan that Ahithophel the Gilonite is giving. Then Absalom said, now, call Hushai the Archite also, and let us hear what he says too. And when Hushai comes to Absalom, Absalom spoke to him, saying, Ahithophel has spoken in this manner. Shall we do as he says? If not, speak up. In other words, he wants to confront Ahithophel's advice with Hushai, who is actually one of David's inside men, inside Absalom's palace men. Hushai said to Absalom, the advice that Ahithophel has given is not good at this time. For, said Hushai, you know your father and his men, and they are mighty men, and they are engaged in their mind, enraged in their minds, like bear robbed of her cub in the field. And your father is a man of war and will not camp with the people. Surely by now he is hidden in some pit or in some other place. And it will be when some of them are overthrown at the first, that when whoever hears it will say, there is a slaughter among the people who follow Absalom, and even he who is valiant, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, that's King David, will melt completely. For all Israel knows that your father is a mighty man, and those who are with him are valiant men. Therefore I advise that all Israel be fully gathered to you, from Dan to Beersheba, like the sand that is by the sea for the multitude, and that you go to battle in person. So we will come upon him in some place where he may be found, and we will fall on him as the dew falls on the ground. And for him, all the men who are with him, there shall not be left as much as one. Moreover, if he has withdrawn into a city, then all Israel shall bring ropes to that city, and will pull it into the river, until there is not one small stone found there. That's the end of verse 13. So what do we have here? We have two advisors, Ahithophel the Gilonite, that says to Absalom, let me go and take care of this, I'll take care of David, and then all the people will scatter or come with me. Be your citizens, you're not going to lose. Hushai has a different advice, tactic. He says, no, you can't do this, because you can't kill the king, the way Ahithophel the Gilonite is telling you, without having all of Israel on your side. Right now you're with the people of Judah in the city of Jerusalem. But what about the northern tribes? The rest of the tribes of Israel? You've got to get them united with you. You got to get them to take your side. So don't hurry. Take your time. Gather the people from the country of Israel. Then you yourself lead the army to go fight David and his men. Remember, Hushai the Archite is David's man. He is the spy inside the palace of Absalom. And he's giving advice to delay the small group of, let's say, commander soldiers that are going to go look for David while David is tired and weary, and on this side of the Jordan, and he's giving him advice. No, it's not that won't work for you. You got to get everybody on your side. That's a delay tactic. And then you yourself, you're the king, you yourself go after David. We'll see where that leads to and what that brings in the next lesson. I stopped at chapter 17, verse 13, and the next lesson will be from verse 14 of chapter 17 of 2 Samuel. All this is fascinating because what do we learn here? We learn how God works. We learn how David works. We learn the mind of David, that on the one side, he doesn't want to take vengeance. He doesn't want to, he accepts God's judgment for his life and believes that only good will come out from this suffering, from this persecution, from this cursing, from this stone throwing by the son of Gera. And we have so many lessons to learn from this. So many strategic lessons for our lives, for the way we behave with our opposition, the way we behave with our enemies, the way we behave with our friends. Lessons about what it means to be loyal to the men of God. Lessons of what it means to suspect those that you have hurt or damaged, or how they're going to react in the future when you're down. And so all these things are extremely important lessons. That's why I recommend to you to read these texts ahead of me and to learn from them for your life. May God bless you, and shalom for now.